The next morning, the fire alarm suddenly went off. I looked toward the lake and saw an orange glow rising above the trees. The boathouse was burning. I grabbed an emergency hose and ran downhill, fighting the flames until the volunteer fire department arrived. The structure survived, but only barely. Investigators later discovered a plastic fuel container near the rear wall, fresh boot prints in the mud, and a partial fingerprint on the container's handle. Then one of my neighbors came forward with security footage from a camera mounted on a boat out on the lake. The recording showed a dark SUV entering my lower access road shortly before the fire started. A man stepped out carrying a container. For only a few seconds, the license plate was clearly visible. It belonged to Grant Crowley. Police obtained a warrant and searched Grant's SUV. Inside, they found bolt cutters, smoke-stained clothing, gloves that smelled strongly of gasoline, and a second phone that connected him to the earlier acts of vandalism. Faced with potential arson charges and the mountain of electronic evidence Owen had provided, Grant finally made a decision. He cooperated. He handed investigators voice recordings, emails, instructions from Vanessa, documents from Lake Meridian Holdings, and photographs showing my truck, my utility cabinet, and Ravenwood's lower road. One recording was especially damaging. Vanessa said, "By the time of the meeting, Mercer needs to look reckless, broke, and dangerous." Grant then asked what they should do about the boathouse. Vanessa answered, "Make it look like his restoration failed." She never actually had to say the word fire. The meaning was obvious. The prosecutor instructed Maya and me to remain silent about Grant's cooperation until the proper moment. That moment arrived during a special Silver Pines community meeting. The room was packed with residents. Vanessa stood behind the podium beneath a photograph of the burned boathouse and claimed the board had been trying to settle the Ravenwood dispute peacefully. Then she blamed me for delaying the marina, increasing legal expenses, dividing the neighborhood, and eventually even causing the fire. She told the residents that my refusal to cooperate had created a serious safety threat and insisted the board needed temporary control over the shoreline. Then Maya stood up. She calmly told everyone that Grant Crowley wasn't absent because of me. He was in custody. The room immediately fell silent. Moments later, the sheriff entered with investigators and a representative from the prosecutor's office. They announced Grant's arrest in connection with the boathouse fire and explained that he had provided recorded statements, financial records, and communications identifying other people involved, including Vanessa. When officers moved to arrest her, Vanessa tried to insist that every decision she had made was for the benefit of the community. But the residents were already shouting questions about their marina deposits, the fraudulent lien, and the fire. After Vanessa was escorted away in handcuffs, Maya presented the evidence. She showed the original 1912 survey, the rejected boundary map, the forged annexation agreement, the 1998 cassette recording, the emails describing the dues as leverage, the foreclosure plan, the shell company connected to Grant, the transferred marina funds, the sabotage messages, and Grant's confession. By the following morning, a judge had suspended the lien, frozen the marina accounts, prohibited Vanessa and Grant from transferring assets, and ordered the preservation of every relevant HOA record. Later, the lien was permanently removed, and the court officially ruled that Ravenwood had never been legally annexed into Silver Pines. The 1998 agreement was declared fraudulent. In the criminal case, Grant admitted that he had cut my gate, entered the boathouse, stolen the shoreline map, vandalized my truck, interfered with my workshop's electrical system, and started the fire. Investigators eventually recovered the missing shoreline map from a locked cabinet at Lake Meridian Holdings. Vanessa had hidden it there because the document directly contradicted the marina's claimed boundary. In the civil case, Maya documented every loss I had suffered, including truck repairs, destroyed tools, canceled contracts, the sabotaged workshop, the flooded library, the burned boathouse, legal expenses, forensic examinations, and the cost of removing a lien that should never have existed. The judge ruled that Vanessa, Grant, Lake Meridian Holdings, and Vanessa's development company were financially responsible. Between frozen accounts, insurance proceeds, and seized assets, they were ordered to pay more than $400,000 in damages. Silver Pines itself was placed under temporary independent management. Residents received refunds for their marina deposits, while old questionable liens and penalties were reviewed and many were dismissed. Legally, I could have prevented Silver Pines from continuing to use the portion of the entrance road that crossed Ravenwood's property. For a moment, I seriously considered doing exactly that. But the residents weren't the people who forged documents, moved money, sabotaged my business, or set the fire. They had been manipulated too. So instead, we created a new recorded road agreement. Silver Pines could continue using the entrance, help maintain it, and never claim ownership of the road. No resident, board member, or contractor could enter Ravenwood's shoreline without my written permission. The marina project was canceled permanently. The following spring, some of the same residents who had once trusted Vanessa showed up to help rebuild the boathouse. They brought lumber, coffee, tools, and a willingness to work. We didn't talk much about everything that had happened. We simply worked side by side. Inside Ravenwood's library, I repaired the damaged shelves, rehung the original shoreline map, and placed the 1912 survey, the copper tube, and the old cassette player nearby. Sometimes I still play that tape just to hear my father's voice. I originally bought Ravenwood believing I was rescuing an abandoned old house. In the end, I discovered the house had been preserving the truth long before I ever arrived. What I restored wasn't simply the mansion. I restored the truth my father had tried to protect. Ravenwood's shoreline, as though Silver Pines already controlled it, even though there had been no sale, no recorded easement, and no legal annexation. Eleanor pulled out an old county ledger and showed me a reference to a temporary shoreline map submitted by Harlan Development. Beside the entry was a handwritten note that read, "Rejected. Ownership not established." She explained that she had refused to record the map as a legitimate property boundary because the developer couldn't provide a supporting deed. That single detail changed everything. It meant Silver Pines may have spent decades treating a rejected planning document as if it were an official property boundary. When I drove back to Ravenwood, I noticed fresh orange markings painted on trees along the slope leading toward the lake. Then I discovered several new survey stakes and a wildlife camera pointed directly at my dock that I knew wasn't mine. I photographed everything and immediately called Maya. While I was still examining the area, Vanessa arrived with her son, Grant Crowley, who handled security for Silver Pines. Grant unfolded a laminated HOA map and insisted that the lower portion of my property was actually community shoreline. I held up my recorded survey and told him my property line extended all the way to the water. Then I asked him how many residents had already paid deposits for boat slips on land that legally belonged to me. Vanessa didn't respond. That brief moment of silence told me everything I needed to know. I called the sheriff, and a deputy arrived shortly afterward. He reviewed the documents from both sides and explained that the ownership dispute would ultimately have to be resolved in court. But because my deed and survey were the only currently recorded ownership documents, he ordered Vanessa and Grant to leave the property. As Grant walked away, he turned toward me and said that once the lien was filed, the bank would decide how much longer I would be allowed to keep Ravenwood. That was when I finally understood the truth. This had never been about unpaid HOA dues. They wanted to pressure me into leaving Ravenwood so they could take control of the shoreline. That night, I installed additional security cameras around the lower gate. At 1:17 in the morning, my phone suddenly alerted me. Grant was back. The footage showed him cutting through the chain on my gate while 3 other men carried survey equipment toward the boathouse. By the time I reached the shoreline, they were gone. The gate was hanging open, mud covered the stone floor, and an old framed shoreline map that had been displayed inside the boathouse had disappeared. They hadn't come there to conduct a legitimate survey. They had come looking for something. By morning, I had sent the security footage to Maya and filed another report with the sheriff's office. The problem was that while the cameras clearly captured trespassing and property damage, they didn't show exactly who had taken the missing map. Maya warned me not to make assumptions. "Stick to the facts," she said. "They cut your gate. They entered your property without permission. The map is gone." That afternoon, Silver Pines sent a mass email to every homeowner in the development, portraying me as aggressive and accusing me of blocking what they called long-established public lake access. They even claimed that my restoration project had weakened the hillside above the water. Then the inspections began. County building inspectors, fire officials, environmental services, and other departments started appearing one after another, each responding to anonymous complaints. They accused me of making unauthorized structural changes, maintaining dangerous electrical wiring, causing contaminated runoff, operating an illegal business, and creating excessive construction noise. Every accusation was false. Every permit was valid. Every inspector left after finding the same thing: no violations. One electrical inspector even told me that my work was better than what he usually saw in newly constructed homes. Then he lowered his voice and said, "Someone isn't trying to discover a problem. They're trying to turn the process itself into the problem." He was exactly right. Vanessa couldn't simply take Ravenwood from me, so she was trying to exhaust me through delays, legal expenses, inspections, and constant pressure. Then they went after my business. One Monday morning, I walked outside and found my work truck sitting on 4 completely flat tires. The passenger side window had been smashed, and several of my tools had been soaked in paint. Across the side of the truck, someone had spray painted one word in bright red: thief. That truck wasn't just transportation. It was how I made my living. I immediately checked the security footage. A man wearing dark clothing had entered the property shortly after 2 a.m. His face was turned away from the camera, but something about the way he walked looked familiar. There was a noticeable dip in his right shoulder. Grant had the exact same uneven stride. It wasn't enough evidence for an arrest, but it was enough to convince me that I wasn't imagining the connection. Maya told me to document every single loss. Towing expenses, replacement tires, damaged equipment, canceled appointments, rental costs, and lost income all had to be recorded. By noon, customers were already canceling scheduled jobs. One customer even admitted that someone had called him and warned that hiring me could create problems with Silver Pines and other HOAs. That was when I stopped thinking of the vandalism as simple intimidation. It was a calculated strategy. They wanted to destroy my cash flow before the lien could take effect. 2 nights later, the power to my workshop suddenly went out, even though every neighboring building still had electricity. A utility technician opened the exterior control cabinet and immediately told me this wasn't a normal outage. Someone had opened the cabinet, removed a protection relay, and bypassed the control wiring in a way that would shut down my operation without causing a fire. This wasn't random vandalism. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. A security camera across the alley captured a dark SUV arriving shortly after midnight. A man stepped out, disappeared behind the building for about 6 minutes, and then returned to the vehicle. The footage was blurry, but the SUV looked almost identical to Grant's. The utility company also discovered that someone had called earlier while pretending to be me and attempted to arrange a temporary power disconnection. When that failed, whoever made the call went directly to the electrical cabinet. At that point, this had moved far beyond harassment. They were trying to remove my ability to defend myself. Maya brought in a forensic document examiner named Dr. Samuel Hayes to examine the annexation agreement Vanessa had given me. His findings were devastating. First, the legal name printed for the HOA did not even exist on the date shown on the document. That name wasn't officially adopted until 3 months later. Second, the notary seal belonged to a person who had stopped working as a notary almost a full year before the supposed signing took place. Third, the paper itself contained optical brighteners normally found in newer office paper, not the older paper stock preserved in surviving developer records from that era. But his final discovery was the most damaging. My father's signature on the annexation agreement wasn't merely similar to a genuine signature from one of his old accounting reports. It was an exact duplicate. Every curve, hesitation, and tiny break in the ink pattern matched perfectly. Dr. Hayes explained that no person signs their name exactly the same way twice. These 2 signatures came from the same source image. Someone had copied my father's legitimate signature and transferred it onto a fabricated agreement. For several days, I had secretly wondered whether my father had actually helped Silver Pines take control of Ravenwood. That report destroyed that doubt. He hadn't betrayed Ravenwood. Someone had used his identity. I returned to his old files and started reading everything with completely different eyes. Inside a black notebook hidden within an old tax folder, I found several entries that had been heavily underlined. Phantom Marina revenue. No legal shoreline access. Boundary map rejected by county. Vanessa present at August meeting. Bank must be notified before funds are released. And finally, Margaret needs protection. My father hadn't joined Ravenwood to the HOA. He had discovered that the developer was using property it didn't own as collateral to secure financing. That meant Vanessa wasn't simply dealing with an old mistake that had been passed down to her. She had been connected to the original scheme. That night, Maya called and explained what I was beginning to understand myself. The old HOA dues were never the real objective. They were leverage. If I signed even a simple acknowledgement, Silver Pines could later claim that I had voluntarily accepted HOA jurisdiction, regardless of what happened with the forged 1998 agreement. They weren't trying to make me admit what happened in the past. They wanted me to give them control over my present. A few days later, Maya called at 7 in the morning with more bad news. The HOA had filed the lien anyway. The claimed amount had now increased to $142,800. By noon, the lender financing the final stage of Ravenwood's restoration froze my remaining credit line. A title review was immediately opened. One of my longtime suppliers called and explained that they could no longer offer payment terms while the property was involved in a legal dispute. Legally, the lien was weak. Financially, however, it worked almost instantly. Work on the east wing roof came to a halt. My custom window order was canceled. The restoration project was grinding to a stop. The following afternoon, Vanessa arrived at Ravenwood alone carrying a settlement offer. She said Silver Pines would completely erase the lien and pay me $200,000 if I signed documents acknowledging Ravenwood's HOA membership, granted permanent access through my private road, and allowed construction of the proposed marina along my shoreline. There was also a confidentiality agreement covering everything connected to 1998. I asked her what would happen if I refused. She calmly told me the lien would remain, the penalties would continue increasing, and eventually I might decide that owning Ravenwood was simply too much responsibility. Then she added that if I could no longer afford the property, a qualified buyer could always step in. Later that evening, Maya traced the company named in the proposed purchase clause. It was Meridian Holdings. Its registered manager was Grant Crowley. Suddenly, the entire plan became obvious. Manufacture a debt, freeze my financing, destroy my income, force me into a distressed sale, then have Grant's company purchase Ravenwood and transfer the shoreline into the marina project. This wasn't neighborhood politics. It was an organized acquisition strategy. I rejected the settlement. Vanessa stared at me and said I was choosing a very expensive principal. I told her no. She had chosen an expensive crime. That night, during freezing weather, someone disabled the supplemental heating circuit protecting part of the house. A pipe inside the library wall burst, and water began flooding the room. The ceiling collapsed in several places, and 10 months of restoration work was suddenly soaked, cracked, and buckling around me. Standing ankle-deep in freezing water, I finally understood what Vanessa was really counting on. She wasn't confident she could defeat me in court. She was betting that she could exhaust me before I ever had the chance to reach a courtroom. The next morning, while I was removing water-damaged shelves from the library, I noticed something strange. One section of the wall sounded hollow when I tapped it. Behind the soaked paneling, I discovered a narrow hidden cavity containing a copper map tube wrapped tightly in oilcloth. Engraved across the cap were the words, "For whoever owns Ravenwood when they come back." Inside that tube was the evidence Vanessa had spent years trying to keep buried. The first item was an original 1912 shoreline survey of Ravenwood, officially sealed by the county. It showed the boundary exactly where my modern survey placed it, running all the way down the slope across the stone boathouse and directly to the waterline. There was no shared recreation zone, no community shoreline, and absolutely no space reserved for a marina. The second document was just as important. It granted the original Silver Pines developer temporary permission to use a narrow section of Ravenwood Road during construction in the late 1990s. The language was clear: temporary and revocable, not a permanent easement. For decades, Silver Pines had apparently treated temporary permission as if it were legal ownership. Then I discovered a letter written by Margaret Vale. She explained that my father had uncovered evidence showing the developer was using Ravenwood's shoreline in financial projections without her permission. He believed they intended to create a fake history of community use and eventually argue that the access had become permanent. Margaret had hidden the original documents inside Ravenwood in case the developers ever returned. At the very bottom of the tube was an old black cassette tape labeled Silver Pines, August 1998. I found an old radio in storage, repaired its damaged power cord, replaced the broken belt using a rubber ring from a plumbing kit, and carefully tightened the tape mechanism. On the third attempt, it finally played. At first, there was nothing but static. Then I heard my father's voice. He was warning Margaret not to sign anything because the shoreline did not belong to the developers. Another man responded that they didn't actually need to own it. They only needed the bank to believe they controlled it long enough for the financing to be released. Then a younger woman's voice came through the static. I recognized it before my father even said her name. Vanessa. She asked how much usage history they would need before their claim could become defensible. My father answered, "Vanessa, there is no defensible claim. There is only fraud." Then he said he would notify the bank before any funds were released. That recording changed everything. Until then, I had evidence of forgery, intimidation, and financial pressure. Now I had Vanessa's own voice connecting her directly to the original scheme. Before I could listen to the recording again, I received a message from someone named Owen Price, the HOA treasurer. He said Vanessa was moving money connected to the marina project and asked to meet before the funds disappeared. Maya came with me. Owen handed us emails, bank statements, meeting minutes, contracts, and eventually an external drive containing backup copies of internal records. Vanessa had no idea he had made those copies. The first email was brutally direct. The dues are leverage. Once Mercer signs, jurisdiction is established. Another message said, if he refuses, freeze the property. Lake Meridian can acquire Ravenwood after foreclosure. There were internal text messages between Vanessa and Grant as well. One read, keep him off the road long enough to hurt his contracts. Grant responded with one word, handled. Another message, sent 2 days before the power sabotage at my workshop, said, he needs pressure from every direction. Grant replied by sending a photograph of my utility control cabinet. Now we had the connection. The vandalized truck, the destroyed income, the utility interference, the fraudulent lien, and the forced sale plan had not been separate incidents. They had been carefully coordinated. Owen also revealed that more than $600,000 in marina deposits had been transferred out of the HOA project account. Some of the money went toward legal expenses, some was transferred to Lake Meridian, and nearly $200,000 ended up inside a development company controlled by Vanessa herself. She wasn't simply trying to steal my shoreline. She was using the homeowner's own money to help finance the takeover. That afternoon, Maya filed emergency motions seeking to freeze the marina account, suspend the lien, block any property transfers, and preserve every remaining record. She also delivered the evidence to the county prosecutor and financial crimes investigators. For the first time since this nightmare began, we weren't simply responding to Vanessa's moves. We were moving first. That night, I locked the lower gate at Ravenwood and started to believe that maybe the worst part was finally over. Then, at 2:08 in